You never think it will happen to you. Friends go through the pain of divorce for one reason or another, but because you trust and love your partner, you never believe you will become another statistic, another failed marriage. But when you look at divorce statistics, especially in the modern era, I wonder why people get married in the first place. The song "Till Death Do Us Part" certainly sounds hollow, its meaning lost over the decades. I guess I should have recognized the signs, but not from what I read online, whether it be stories, articles, or just being more observant. When you are in love with someone, you tend to view the world through a rose-colored lens. When you're married, have children, a home and a life together, the thought of growing old together becomes unpleasant. But apparently the signs were there, and I had seen them before. I grew up in a family that was eventually labeled single parent. Growing up, my parents' marriage seemed strong. They seemed to love and respect each other. My father worked hard. The physically demanding work took a lot out of him. But he loved his wife and family and sacrificed himself for what could probably be called the highest good. My mother went back to work as soon as my younger sister went to school. As kids, we had no idea what was going on. But looking back, I soon recognized some of the signs, and that's when I figured it all out. She didn't start having an affair right away. I was a teenager when it started. My brother was 18 months younger and my younger sister was 3 years younger. It started the way many romances start. First, it was working late, then the business trips, showers as soon as she got home from an afternoon spent with her lover. She dressed much better than she had ever dressed for our father. And since this was before smartphones, the secret phone calls and disappearances of my mother at inopportune times for her liaisons. My father only found out about their affair because he walked in on them. I later learned that he had finished work early, hoping to surprise my mother by taking her out for an afternoon, who told him she was taking a half day to do her hair and go shopping. Instead, he arrived home and found her car in the driveway and a car next to it that he admitted he recognized. He parked on the street and went home, entering through the back door. Upon entering the bedroom, he found his wife, my mother, being entertained by her boss. In the marital bed. My father lost his temper and hit him. His name was Jim Thompson, and he ended up crawling out of our house, bruised. My father quickly realized that adultery meant nothing in a country where no-fault divorce was the norm. Some people argue that possession is 9/10 of the law. My father tried to kick her out of the house, pack her things, and send her to my parents. When they found out what she had done, they wanted nothing to do with her. Her sister also refused to take her in. Since the house was in her name and also in my father's name, she refused to move in. My father was caught between a hammer and anvil. If he had stayed, divorce would have been impossible. A husband and wife must live apart for 12 months, that is, live in different places, before a divorce can be granted. My father tried to evict my mother more than once because of her adultery, but it was not a crime and she had every right to stay in the house. Yes, sometimes no-fault divorces suck because in the case of adultery, there is a guilty party who caused the divorce, and the fact that she can leave the marriage without getting punished for breaking her vows seems a little unfair. My father eventually gave up, not wanting to stay in the same house with his cheating wife. He found an apartment and moved out. He couldn't find a place large enough to accommodate all three of us, so we were left to live with my mom. I guessed what was going on, and immediately let my mother know what I thought of her. She tried to explain her reasons, but I told her I was going to go live with my father as soon as I could. My younger brother and younger sister were not told anything, so they just wondered why my father had left. I tried to explain everything to them without getting into the conversation. The only good thing my mom did during that year was that we kept seeing my dad. For the first couple months, he was broken. He tried his best to make a happy face for his kids, but even we could see that the smile was forced. Being the oldest, he sat me down at the table one night after my siblings had gone to bed and confessed that we were the only reason he was staying here, but he would fight for custody and try to get a home if possible. It was a pipe dream, though. In those days, men were rarely granted custody, and when it came to divorce after 12 months of separation, they had to go to court to resolve custody and other issues. When I became old enough to stand trial, I stated emphatically that I wanted to live with my father. But because my brother and sister were considered too young to make that decision, even though the judge took them at their word, custody of all three of us was awarded to my mother. The only silver lining for my father is that there is no child support in Australia, although there is such a thing as spousal maintenance. However, it is not always awarded. And since our mother was earning well anyway, he only had to pay reasonable alimony. Unlike in the United States, in Australia, child support is paid reasonably to the parent who is no longer in the household, so my father would not be left destitute because of child support payments. The next 4 years were difficult. I already despised my mother and she knew it. To every man she tried to introduce as her new partner, I made it clear that my mother was a whore who cheated on her husband, forcing him to leave the family home. More than once, I left her in tears. By the time I was 16, we hardly spoke at all, and I left the house as often as possible, for school, for a part-time job, or just not showing up. After the divorce, my father did get his life together and eventually met a beautiful woman named Naomi, his fellow divorcee. I supported their relationship and she soon came to love his 3 children as her own. She had a daughter of her own, and we treated her like a sister. Despite the heartache, I was glad my father had found love again, even though I knew he was hesitant to marry. Naomi seemed to realize this and happily agreed to cohabitate. Eventually, they rented a house together and established a de facto relationship. As soon as I turned 18 and graduated from high school, I moved out of my father's house. I hated leaving my siblings behind, the only reason I stayed in the house until that age, but by then, my relationship with my mother had become unacceptable. My last words to her were, I'll admit, incredibly cruel. But it was just an explosion of all the negative thoughts I'd been holding inside me since my father had been forced to leave home, simply because he didn't want to stay married to a cheating whore. Despite the collapse of our relationship, she still sobbed as I packed the car on the day we left. I hugged my brother and sister, assuring them that I would be there for them and would not forget them, and then took one last look at my mother. The experience with my mother made me wary of women. I had read many articles about infidelity and knew that I was a monogamous person at heart and would expect the same from any partner. I had a few girlfriends in high school, but once I started working and making money, I started dating, hoping I would find a woman worthy of my love and trust. I met Kylie when I was 21 years old. She was a recent university graduate. I was working as an engineer and taking night classes because, although I enjoyed working with my hands, I hoped to rise to a management position in the organization. I met her at a corporate event representing an engineering company, and she was working part-time as a sales rep for a supply company. We hit it off immediately, and by the end of the day, I had her number in my phone with a promise to call her. Hot date, Mark? My roommate asked. He was one of my best high school buddies, and we'd agreed to live together so the rent and bills would be cheaper. Something like that, Dave? Is this the girl you met at the conference? Yeah. Finally got up the courage to call her? I looked at him and smirked. Back off, Dave. I just waited a couple days so I wouldn't seem too pushy. Trust me, she was pretty excited on the phone when I called her and was eager to meet up as soon as possible. After applying some aftershave cream, I decided I looked pretty good. Better than looking like a bum anyway. Even though I had a decent job, money was still tight, but I felt comfortable enough. We agreed to meet at one of the bars in the city, and then it all depended on the case. I didn't usually organize dinner and drinks on first dates. Too many stories of women looking for free food and the man who paid for it never hearing about it again. Walking into the bar after I parked the car, she was sitting on a stool. She was already sipping her drink, meeting my gaze across the room. When her eyes lit up and she smiled, my heart seemed to beat faster. Over a couple of drinks, we gradually got to know each other. She admitted that her role in the corporation was temporary and that she was only hired because she had a pretty face, and that attracted men in her direction. She laughed, admitting it was true, but it made her feel like a piece of meat. And so many married men hit on me, she added. It was disgusting. I realized what she was getting at. I know my own mother cheated, but both sexes were equally bad when it came to cheating. Out of my own curiosity, I looked up the statistics online. and the fact that so many men and women admitted to having extramarital affairs shocked me. Making matters worse was the fact that, according to many articles written in Australia, we were notorious as a bunch of cheating scumbags. "You were the perfect gentleman, Mark," she added, taking my hand in hers. "You looked me in the eye the whole time and remained completely professional. At least until you asked for my number. You were the only sincere person I've ever met. I wish you were married." I put my hand over my heart and raised my other hand. "I swear I'm not married. Ask any of my friends." She smiled and took my hand again. "Good, because I have a good feeling about you. I've already been hurt." We agreed to take things slow. The first couple weeks we met for coffee or drinks. At the end of the third night over drinks, we had our first kiss. By then, she already knew about my parents' relationship. She hugged me tightly, and for some reason I felt better in my heart. When we kissed, I immediately knew it was the right thing to do. When I met her gaze, I sensed she was thinking the same thing. Drinks turned into dinner. A week later, she returned to the apartment I shared with Dave. He had a girlfriend of his own and spent most of his time at her place, so thankfully he wasn't there. After our last drink together, I took her hand and we made love for the first time. A month later, she confessed her love to me. I reciprocated, and things went on from there. Once she found a steady job, we started talking about serious things like living together, buying a house, marriage, and then children. By this point, even though I was thinking about what had happened to my father, Kylie had already won my heart, and that was all that mattered. She was a pleasure to be around, and she admitted that she wanted to be a wife and mother above all else. Before we got married, we agreed to buy a house together. Fortunately, this was before the housing boom that was sweeping Australia, especially Sydney. However, due to lack of employment and a bad credit history, which she told me about, she could not co-borrow on the mortgage. I couldn't afford such a mortgage myself, nor would any bank offer it to me on my own, so my father suggested I become a co-borrower so that his salary would supplement my own. I had no idea how much it would save my ass in the future, but at the moment Kylie was very grateful to him and almost wept when he told her she was just another daughter. At the same time, her parents just adored me, so when I popped the question just 3 months after moving into our new home, everyone was thrilled when we announced our engagement and wedding date. Marrying Kylie was the best day of my life up to that point. I married the woman I thought was my soulmate, and she often told me I was hers. Walking down the aisle towards her, I was probably grinning like a fool. She started giggling when I took her hand, and we were both happy that we had finally committed to each other. It wasn't a church wedding, but a park wedding with a marquee nearby for the reception. Our honeymoon lasted a week on an island in the Pacific. Sun, sea, sand. Not surprisingly, we found out that that's when she became pregnant with our first child. She gave birth to a beautiful baby girl 9 months after our honeymoon and was ready for another child 6 months after giving birth. 18 months later, she gave birth to our son. 3 months later, we decided that 2 was enough. We both had what we wanted. To my surprise, she didn't want to do surgery on me in case we changed our minds, nor did she want to get her tubes tied. She just agreed to go back on birth control since it had never bothered her before, and life went on as usual. She was a housewife and mother until both children went to school. As soon as our son went to school, she resumed work, but did not take a break from her studies until both children moved on to middle school. Only then did she return to full-time employment. By the time we were both 45, I was already working as a regional manager for a national network of engineering companies. I traveled often, but rarely stayed home more than one night. Kylie had a career in real estate and ran her own office, although she occasionally traveled to the main office in the CBD. Our daughter, Charlotte, left home to live with her boyfriend. He was a lovely young man who was already committed to her. I assumed wedding bells were looming on the horizon. Our son, Stephen, was still in university and living in an apartment near campus. I was aware of his varied interests, but Kylie and I supported him regardless of his life choices. By then, we had been married for over 20 years. I felt we still loved each other as much as the day we exchanged vows. I kept my eyes on him. Hand on heart, I could look at another woman, but it didn't occur to me to do anything, because I had given my heart to Kylie, and I didn't want to break that trust. But I couldn't help myself. What happened to my father had always been on my mind. I should have known better. I should have seen the signs. But when I finally realized the truth, I knew I had to take certain steps to prepare for the inevitable. You just never think it will happen to you. Do you think she's cheating on you? Dave asked, hearing the surprise in his tone. Buddy, she loves you to death. Why on earth? I was blind, Dave. I thought that once Steve left home, our relationship would go back to the way it was. But I'm starting to notice that she's acting the way my mother acted with my father. Just thinking about that slut made my blood boil. I had hardly seen her in the last 20 years. She was present at my wedding, but only because of my father's intervention. By then, he had already married Naomi and was long retired. He advised me to be a better man and invite her. I didn't have to invite her, but if I didn't, I'd look like the bad guy. I gritted my teeth and sent her an invitation. Other than texting about her grandchildren, whom she rarely visited, I had nothing to do with her. Kylie knew that and never insisted on maintaining any kind of relationship with her. So what are you going to do? Gather all the evidence I can, and if she's cheating on me, just dump her. And how will you do that? I have ways and means. The last few months, she's been more secretive than usual. I should have noticed it sooner. It's my own fault, but it's what I got for trusting her. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late to stop and I prepared for the inevitable. Monday morning, I have a meeting with a private investigator. All I want to know is if she's done anything dirty. I don't need photos and videos, though. Anything that will help my case. It's a shame you can't get a divorce in this damn country on the grounds of adultery. That's true. But a man can defend himself if he's smart and defends himself early enough. Fortunately, she waited until the kids were out of the house before she cheated. And there are one or two things she forgot about in our lives that could have turned the situation in my favor. He patted my shoulder. I'm sorry, buddy. I really am. I sipped my beer. Me too. The thing is, until I get confirmation, I can't stop loving her. Maybe it's just my suspicious mind. Maybe I'm just a jealous bastard. But the signs are there, buddy. I wasn't paying attention until I finally realized what was going on. The next morning, I drove to my father's house. Naomi greeted me as usual, asking if I could sit with him while I explained the situation. I must have had that look on my face because even though it was only 10 a.m., he shoved a bottle of beer in my hand and told me to take my time before he started. I smiled as he took Naomi's hand. They still loved each other as much as they did on their wedding day. Their relationship didn't last long before my father wanted her to be his wife. I think Kylie is having an affair. Naomi sighed. My father muttered, Shit, not again. I'll hire a private investigator on Monday. But all the signs are there, Dad. The same signs you told me about Mom. All the signs you told me about. If she's cheating, she must have read a book on how to get away with it. But once I pulled my head out of my ass, and what do you want me to do? I grinned. Naomi giggled, as I'm sure the smile was not a pleasant one. Daddy, I'm going to give you my house. Remember when you signed the mortgage years ago? Kylie never put her name on the deed. Legally, you and I own the property, and when I'm gone, she will be considered nothing more than a tenant. I am selling you the house as a gift by simply removing my name from the deed. Under state and federal law, I can do that for free. Then what do we do? I sign a month-to-month lease with you. Once I dissolve our marriage, if it comes to that, you can work things out with Kylie. While she'll have some tenant rights since she's been living in this house for a while, we'll discuss how you can legally evict her by court order. Unfortunately, because of the plan I have in my head, I won't be around. Have you thought it through, Mark? Naomi inquired. Kylie and I discussed monogamy and fidelity before we got married. She knows about my mother. I warned her that if she ever cheated on me, I wouldn't forgive her. I don't care if it's once or 100 times. If you sleep with someone else, you're breaking our vows, which means you're breaking the prenup. At least with this guilt-free crap, I can walk away easily. And I won't have to pay her a dime. No alimony since they don't live at home. And no spousal support since she makes as much as I do. Thank God we don't have those damn alimony laws like some states. Screw giving some cheating bitch a portion of my paycheck just because she can't keep her legs shut. I took a sip of my beer and looked at Naomi. Sorry, I'm a little pissed off about that. I hope I'm wrong. Back home, Kylie was sitting in the living room, curled up on the couch watching a movie. She was smiling at me as always, her eyes lighting up at my appearance. Where have you been? She asked. Meeting with my dad. I just needed some advice about something. About what? About a job. There might be a new opportunity on the horizon. The problem was, I only had suspicions, no concrete evidence that she'd done anything nasty to me. And if she was having an affair, it was with someone she didn't see every day. I knew that the day the bachelorette parties started out of the blue would be one of the straws that broke the camel's back. But so far, nothing like that had happened. Sometimes she'd be late for work, but that was enough for me. If she was suspicious, she'd think I was cheating on her on those rare nights when I was late for work. When she went to bed, she would snuggle up to me as always and whisper how much she loved me. It hurt me to think that she was lying to me. Maybe she loved me, but she needed something or someone new. If so, we would get divorced and she could find a new guy. I've read fictional stories about wives who for whatever reason turned into huge whores and did horrible things. The thought of my beautiful wife participating in such things gave me an almost gag reflex. Until I had proof, I had to trust her. It was the old adage, trust but verify. So when I whispered back that I loved her, I still meant it. But the thought that she might break our vows was too unbearable at times. The next day was Monday. I went to work first. Every morning we had breakfast together. Then I brushed my teeth. It was exactly the same that morning. Her eyes were shining as she told me she loved me and wished me a good day. I almost felt guilty knowing that at lunchtime I would be facing a private investigator ready to set up surveillance on my wife because I believed she was cheating on me after 20 years of what I thought was a happy marriage. I was a little surprised to be greeted by a woman. I expected to see an ex-cop with an aversion to women, dressed in a trench coat and fedora. I guess I watched too many old movies. She noticed my surprise and, smiling, explained the process, what was on offer and how much it would cost. Will she notice the money being moved around? No, we have separate accounts, but there is a joint account where we pay bills and other household sundries. What makes you think she's having an affair? I explained what I had seen my mother do, then what my father discovered, what my mother admitted to, and then explained the current situation. How are you doing sexually? She finally asked. When my son left home, everything was fine. But about 6 months ago, it slowed down again. I thought we'd just put it out of our minds. To tell you the truth, I'd have intimacy with my wife every damn night if I could. Just because I'm 45 doesn't mean I'm not interested in it anymore. Have you noticed changes in her behavior? Yes. They're barely noticeable, but they're there. Are you familiar with the term red flags? She nodded, and I grinned. Not quite enough for a communist parade, but enough to make me anxious and suspicious. She explained what they had to offer. It's phone tapping, video surveillance, identity tracking, and all sorts of activities, some of which she admitted might not stand up to scrutiny, meaning they would be considered somewhat illegal. I had to explain that it wasn't a permanent affair unless I had my head buried in the sand. I had no idea if she was seeing someone on her lunch break, working late, or just occasionally getting laid when she just wanted some other sensations. I had to admit that I just didn't know and wanted to know the truth. I was given time to think about it and was informed that I would call on Friday to start the follow-up early the following week. It was hard to give up sex with my wife. I still didn't know the truth, but the thought of now having to share her with one or more men made me completely uncomfortable. I could have pretended to be sick, but I told the truth. I just wasn't interested. I know what upset her when I rejected her advances. Eventually, she asked if I was stressed about work. I was preoccupied with something, so I guess her curiosity was satisfied. She snuggled up to me as always and whispered that she loved me. I called Wednesday and asked them to start immediately. I needed to know as this was starting to drive me crazy. I couldn't shake the thought that I was dreaming the whole thing. No wonder so many spouses who have been cheated on are mentally traumatized. In the end, even though I paid for their services and they found proof, it only took a month of fighting for my wife to finally show herself in all her glory. By then, I was reading literature every day about cheating spouses, whether male or female, all the signs of infidelity, how they pull the wool over their eyes, and what spouses can do when a marriage breaks up. I was already prepared. I had already started moving things into the car, and I had what is called an evacuation bag. The workers knew I was getting ready to move. All I had to do was give them a date. Our house was now my father's, and the lease didn't mention anything about my wife. With any luck, she'd be kicked out of the house within a couple months. It was Friday evening. I got home at the usual time. When I entered the house, Kylie was usually sitting in the living room watching TV and sipping a glass of wine. We'd usually order takeout, talk about our week, maybe discuss weekend plans, snuggle up to each other, and then head to the bedroom. Before she started acting differently, Friday night was usually a lovely evening when the kids finally left the house. We made love all the time, sometimes hardly stopping until Sunday. But instead, I heard her busy in the bathroom. I almost laughed to myself. The situation was so trivial that I grabbed a beer from the kitchen and settled down on the couch. You never think it's going to happen to you. I waited for her to appear in the pitch darkness. I expected to see a lecherous little black dress. Instead, she wore a motley blouse, a short skirt, stockings, and stiletto shoes. She had styled her hair, applied makeup, jewelry accentuated everything. She was simply stunning. Too bad it wasn't for me. I didn't realize it right away. "Oh, Mark, I didn't realize you were home." "I came home at my usual time, Kylie. You've obviously been too busy primping and prepping for whatever it is you're doing. Where are you going?" She took a deep breath. "I have a date tonight, Mark, with John from work." "Why?" "It's just for work." It was a brazen lie. I knew who he was. He was an affair partner. He worked at the head office of her company. He was married and had children, about the same age as both of us. I'm not sure what she expected me to say, but there comes a point when a man just washes his hands of the situation. If she expected me to beg or plead, she obviously didn't know me at all. She knew my stance on monogamy and fidelity. Standing up, she met my gaze as I approached her. I stared at her intently, and eventually she recoiled. I smiled as I headed for the kitchen. "You're not going to say anything, Mark?" "No." She had no idea how ready I was. I guess we were both good actors. The only difference was that I wasn't tearing her heart out with lies. "Okay, fair enough. I'll be home later. We'll talk then." I didn't say anything but followed her to the door. She stopped and looked back at me, looking as unsure as I'd ever seen her. Whether it was guilt or not, I didn't know, and I didn't care anymore. "Good night, Mark," she said quietly. "Goodbye, Kylie." She must have realized what I was trying to say, but apparently she figured I'd be another man I'd read about who would put up with shit like that. But I wasn't a cuckold. I wasn't going to put up with that kind of shit. I wasn't interested in open marriages, wife splitting, and things like that. It's demeaning, degrading, and completely overturns the vows made in marriage. As soon as she left, I put my plan into action. I grabbed my evacuation bag and packed another suitcase, putting them in the car. I got on the internet and thanked the heavens that in this day and age, everything can be done through a phone app or online. We had very little debt, just a credit card that I immediately paid off and canceled. I paid all upcoming bills and then transferred most of our savings from our joint account to my own. I left her with enough money to pay her rent and bills for a month or two. After that, she was on her own. Possession is 9/10 of the law. She didn't own the house, and by the time she realized our savings were gone too, I would be gone. Walking around the house one last time, I couldn't help but sigh. So many good memories now ruined. Taking another mug of beer, I had 3 calls to make. The first one would be easy. The last 2 would be the hard ones. "Dad, it's confirmed. She's cheating on me. She had the nerve to admit that she's going on a date with another man tonight. The plan goes into effect from now on." "Where are you going?" to Adelaide. I have a new job there for 12 months. When the divorce is final, I'll probably go back to Sydney. But that's the thing. We'll wait and see. All right, son. I'll make sure she doesn't find out where you are. New number? I'll settle that matter as soon as I get there. I'll send you my new address as soon as I find a place to live. Drive carefully and don't do anything stupid. Dad, all I'm doing is leaving a cheating spouse. Unfortunately, this time, like father, like son sounds a little hollow. You haven't done anything wrong, Mark. Just find peace in what you're doing, and soon you'll move on with your life. Just know that Naomi and I love you. Do your kids know? I'll call them next time. Good luck, son. Talk to you soon. Calling my kids was the hardest call I've ever made. I called my daughter first. She will always be Daddy's little girl. When I explained the situation, she cried on the other end of the phone. That's what hardened my heart. To hear my little girl sobbing because her daddy had gotten his heart broken. I assured her that I will always love her, but for the moment, I am leaving. I'll email her all my new info once I get settled, but I'm not going to tell anyone anything for now. As for my son, he has shown the stoic attitude I would expect from any young man. He called his mother a whore, and the only question he had for me was what I was going to do with him. Snap! I'm going to find out where he lives and send it to his wife, I admitted. She deserves to know the truth. Other than that, I have no desire for revenge, Steve. This isn't fiction. This is real life. I'm heartbroken right now, but all I'm going to do is wait for the divorce and then somehow rebuild my life. I'm only 45, 46 when the divorce happens. What about counseling? Can she demand it? Marriages here aren't like ours, and neither are divorce laws. Steve, you've read too many stories based on state laws. If we've lived apart for 12 months, I can file for divorce. Since you're both over 18, I won't even have to attend court, although I will, just to make sure everything goes smoothly. She can't demand counseling since we've been married for 20 years. Well, I'd be careful, Dad. You know how the courts can be, if she's persistent enough. Then I'll just take my evidence to the counselor, put the pictures in front of them, and ask them if they'll stay married to the woman who's cheating on them. Okay, Dad. Well, take care of yourself and keep in touch when you get to where you're going. I'll keep you posted as I assume Mom will be contacting me. She knows Lottie will protect you. Thanks, Steve. We'll talk soon. That was it. I wrote Kylie a short letter explaining that I was leaving and that she would hear from my father soon. I didn't give her the reason, leaving it as a bit of a surprise. I also explained that I had already called our children and told them the truth, just as my father had done. She could tell her parents that I left, but if I started getting insults or requests for reconciliation, I would send them proof. And I finally took off my wedding ring and placed it on the coffee table, along with the note and all the proof I had received. They were copies, as I kept the originals in case I needed them for any reason. As I got into the car, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but I found that all the stress I had been feeling disappeared as soon as I drove away from the house. I booked a hotel on the western edge of the city to prepare for my trip to Adelaide. I had 2 weeks to get there and get my life settled, so I took my time and decided to stay in random country towns that only had a pub, post office, and police station, usually all in one building. A week later, I arrived in Adelaide. I was met at the office where I was to work by a few people I recognized from previous corporate conferences. I already knew my role, so knowing I was a stranger in their city, they took me outside and showed me around, recommending neighborhoods where I should live. I ended up staying in a hotel for a month while I chose a place to live. I ended up choosing a modern 3-bedroom apartment in North Adelaide after researching information and finding that it was one of the most beautiful suburbs in the city. I was reluctant to buy an apartment as the average price was expensive, although not as bad as Sydney. I intended to return home to Sydney after 12 months. As soon as I moved in and changed rooms, I informed my father, brothers, sisters, and children of the change in my circumstances. Charlotte immediately called wanting to visit me. I missed her terribly and arranged for her to fly down for a month. My son was finishing his studies, but as it was only 3 months before Christmas, he would visit me then as he could stay for a few weeks. As for my father, he let me know what was going on with Kylie. Are you aware that she didn't get home until the next morning? Yes, I didn't distract the private investigators until the next day, as I was curious as to what she was doing that night. She went out to dinner with him and everything was very romantic. They then spent the night in a hotel in the city. There was nothing more I needed to know. I thanked them for their efforts and paid as their services were not needed after that. Well, I heard about it through the grapevine and also what she told me. When she got home, she found your wedding ring, the note, and the evidence. She called me, your children, and her family in hysterics. You obviously weren't answering your cell phone, and I know she was sending you emails. All calls from her went to voicemail and were deleted. All emails from her I marked as spam. Well, that was just the beginning of her problems. A week later, I showed up on her doorstep and showed her the lease we signed. Then I showed her the paperwork that you had given me the house as a gift. Her face turned pale as she realized it was all quite legal. I gave her 3 months to find a suitable place to live, and if she doesn't leave, I'll have the police evict her. She's still living there, but I know she wants to move out. Has she asked about me? Of course. She asked about your family, your children, your friends, even where you work. She's eaten up with guilt for throwing away 20 years of our life together. Has she explained to anyone why? Not really. She's sorry, of course, but I heard the same thing from your mother. She was sorry she got caught, not sorry she cheated on me. Cheaters always live in a fantasy world where they think they are doing nothing wrong. The usual nonsense is that it was just sex. I never cheated on my wife for just sex, and believe me, Dad, by the time I was in my 30s and 40s, I'd gotten plenty of proposals. But I loved my wife and I wouldn't dare back down from my vows. I had a second chance with Naomi, Mark. Give yourself time to heal, mourn your marriage, and when you're ready, open your heart to someone else. There are millions of good women in the world, Mark. Thanks, Dad. Love you, son. Take care of yourself. Work kept me distracted. I ended up traveling around the state of South Australia, visiting various stores and suppliers, and carving out time on weekends to explore some of the region, especially the Barossa Valley. I found that divorce had made me a tough negotiator, unwilling to concede an inch unless it benefited my company. At least my bosses were happy with my performance at work and were already talking my ear off about staying in Adelaide permanently. My daughter visited me a month after I moved into this apartment. While waiting for her at the airport, she screamed, "Daddy!" and rushed to me. I hugged her tightly, spun her around, and she immediately cried, whispering how much I loved her and that once this was over, I would be home again for good. She spent a week with me, and even though I was working, I spent most of my time at home. But whenever I had a spare moment, we chatted about anything that came to mind. She informed me that her mother had been flooding her with calls trying to explain her side of the story. Although I didn't want to show her proof, I had a printed report that I finally gave in and showed her. By the time she stopped reading, she was in floods of tears and almost screaming how much she hated her mother. This was not my intention, but despite my assurances that her mother still loved her, I had a bad feeling that it would take her a long time to forgive her mother, if she forgave her at all. The day she left hurt us both, as I knew she wanted to stay with me, just to keep me company. I hugged her for what seemed like hours before she needed to leave. In the months that my marriage was falling apart, I never shed a tear. I was angry about it, but not upset. I'm not ashamed to admit that I cried for a few minutes in the car as my daughter drove away. It made me realize that I felt very alone. But at the same time, her visit revitalized me. I talked to her every night. My son called me at least once every couple of days. My siblings knew what had happened, and my younger sister promised to visit me as soon as she could. My father kept me informed of all the happenings. Even the guys from my old office in Sydney seemed to be aware of some of the events, but usually called just to chat and laugh. It was 6 weeks until Christmas when lightning struck again. I strolled the aisles of the nearest supermarket, squirming with boredom. Kylie and I always went grocery shopping together. We laughed at each other, acted goofy, and it was always an enjoyable activity. I reached for a bottle of salad dressing, not noticing the woman reaching for the same bottle. Our hands collided and we both turned and stared at each other. I'm pretty sure my jaw dropped slightly, and her cheeks immediately colored. "I'm sorry," I said. "No, it's my fault. I didn't notice you. Please take the bottle. I can get something else." "I can't take it. It's the last one." I don't know where I got the confidence to say what I said next. "Tell you what, you'll take the bottle if you have coffee with me afterward." I had no idea who she was, what her name was, or anything else, but that touch lit a spark in me, and the beauty of her face made me want to get to know her better. I held out my hand. "I'm Mark." She smiled, taking my hand and feeling how soft her skin was. "I'm Jennifer. Do you often pick up women in supermarkets, Mark?" "No, you're the first." "And you're sure I'm single?" "If you're not, I'll withdraw my invitation. If yes, I hope you'll say yes." She was a brunette with hair almost to her shoulders. Her bright blue eyes were protected by a pair of thin-rimmed black glasses perched on a small nose. Her lips were full but real, and her face was classically beautiful. I had no idea of her age. I wanted to examine the rest of her but held back, even though I guessed she was 6 inches shorter than me. I don't know what she thought of me in response, but judging by her smile, she liked what she saw. "I'd like to get some coffee. Why don't you give me your number?" I gave her my number and she texted me back. "I'll be done shopping in about half an hour. Then I need to take this home to clean up. But I can meet you in a couple hours if you want." "Are you local?" "Yes, I live nearby. What about you?" "Same. I hate driving too far just to go grocery shopping." "Let me know where you are and I'll meet you there." Pushing the cart forward, she placed a hand on my forearm. "I'll see you soon, Mark. It's been too long since I've had a date at the coffee shop." I heard the tone and met her gaze. I saw the pain in them, as I saw the same expression in my own eyes when I looked in the mirror. "I'll text you when I get home and let you know where I'll be." After doing the rest of my shopping, I took advantage of the self-service and practically rushed home, throwing everything in the fridge and cabinets before showering and changing. Before I left, I sent Jennifer a text asking if she liked the nearby coffee shop I'd grown to love since moving into the neighborhood. She replied a couple minutes later, admitting that she frequents the same store quite often, and asked if we'd seen each other before. Admittedly, I was a little nervous waiting for her to arrive. I had dated my wife during our marriage, but this was my first real date in 20 years. She walked in, dressed in an absolutely gorgeous sundress. After buying her a drink, we just got to know each other. She confessed that she was simply amazed at my confidence in asking her out in the middle of a busy supermarket. She then added, "But when you touched my hand, Mark, I felt something." "So it wasn't just me." She blushed but nodded. "No, I often read about things like that, but I think it's just fantasy." She held out her hand to me, and we smiled as I closed my palm around hers. "I just felt it again," she whispered. "Definitely felt it from my side." We didn't get too deep into the story, not on a first date. I recognized her name, she was single, and she smiled as she showed me her left hand, though it was obvious there had once been a ring on the third finger. She worked as a kindergarten teacher, but she had no children of her own. She lived alone in a small apartment. She had a few close friends. Her parents lived in the city. She had a younger sister, and she was 35 years old. "Oh," I said. I, uh, 45. "I don't care how old you are, Mark. All I care about is what kind of man you are." When she said that, I had to admit that I had broken up with my wife. Noticing the nervous look on her face, I sighed and asked if she wanted another drink, since some explanation would be required. I didn't want to tell her everything on our first meeting, but if it was necessary. She made me smile by saying, "No, Mark, I trust you so far. I can see that you're in pain." "Is it that obvious?" I saw the same look in the mirror when he broke my heart. She took my hand again and squeezed it. "It gets easier, but at first it's just one day at a time. Then the weeks and months will go by, and soon the man who broke your heart will no longer matter." She smiled at me again. "And then maybe you'll meet the very person who starts to mend that very heart. It's just that some people wait longer than others, but eventually it happens." My father used to say the same thing. "Your father is a wise man." We finished our second glass and walked outside. Walking to her car, I felt awkward, not knowing whether to kiss her, hug her, or just wish her well. When I hugged her, part of me didn't want to let her go. I couldn't imagine finding someone I was attracted to so strongly and so quickly again. I guess we both didn't want to break the embrace. Give me a call this week, Mark. I'd love to talk to you again. How about tonight? She chuckled, and it was a dagger to the heart. You can call me whenever you want. I called her that night and every night after that. Not wanting to interfere with her regular teacher's week, I asked if she wanted to go out to dinner on Friday night. When she said she'd love to, I practically danced around the apartment as soon as I hung up the phone. I haven't felt so giddy in a long time. At the conference on Thursday, more than one person remarked on my rather sunny disposition. Everyone knew about my separation and impending divorce, so they immediately assumed I was seeing someone. Not wanting to jinx it, I said that I enjoyed my date at the coffee shop and that I would be having dinner with the same person the next night. I added that I wasn't interested in going on dates. I dated one woman at a time. If it didn't work out, I tried with another. The restaurant I chose had rave reviews online, but I hadn't visited it before. It was a casual dining room, but the food was supposed to be excellent. Despite the casual atmosphere, I still wore slacks rather than jeans, a long-sleeved button-down shirt, a pair of leather shoes, and some cologne, although stubble was kept to a minimum. The restaurant had a bar, and I smiled when Jennifer was already waiting for me there. She looked incredibly nervous. Noticing my approach, she stood up, and without hesitation, I leaned in to kiss her. She immediately kissed me back. "Wow," she whispered, pulling away from me. "If only you were going to greet me like that on our second date. I wanted to do it at the end of our first." A waiter approached us to take us to our seats. Luckily, we got a small semicircular booth so we could sit side by side. After ordering our drinks, we started talking about our weeks. It was impossible not to notice how passionate she was about teaching, but when she admitted that she wanted to have children of her own, I started talking about mine. So I think we were both annoyed when the waiter came back and asked about our order, as it disrupted the conversation. We agreed to split an appetizer and dessert, with everyone getting the main course. I was amazed at how easily the conversation flowed. I was mesmerized by her face, her voice, her mannerisms. I'm sure she caught my eyes more than once and blushed every time. The food was excellent, no complaints, and the waiters and waitresses were attentive but not too intrusive. I paid after dinner, although she suggested we go to Holland's before I asked if she wanted another drink. She immediately agreed. I took her hand and led her to a bar I'd found online. It was a quiet place, a man at a piano playing background music. There were more booths here. Jennifer was enjoying a cocktail and I was enjoying a bourbon with a mixer. "What's wrong, Mark?" she finally asked. I told her everything, about how we met, about our life together, about our children, about our careers. But then I explained what happened to my father, about how my relationship with my mother didn't work out, about their divorce and what I learned. Then I gradually realized that my wife was doing the same thing. Then I confessed how I left, which I did a few weeks before all of this. I'm still married, Jennifer, but we live separately. I moved here to make sure the divorce went through. I'm not sure if you would consider what I'm doing as cheating or not. I won't blame you if you do. But my marriage is over. It exists in name only. I will return to Sydney to make sure the divorce is finalized. And if you met someone here? Then I talked to him about our options. My children are in Sydney. Being so far away from them is hard. I had to look away as admitting it upset me. I miss them every day. My ex-husband was a piece of work, Mark. He swept me off my feet when I was 19. He was 25 at the time. The age difference didn't bother me, but my parents warned me about him. But I was in love and didn't listen to them. I didn't pay attention to the red flags that popped up a couple months later. I was surprised that he let me go to work, but that was all I was allowed to do. Slowly but surely, he isolated me from family and friends. I was expected to teach school and then come home and practically become his maid and whore. She paused, as my gut felt that this was only the beginning of the story. I guess it was even worse from there. I talked to him backwards, meaning I disrespected my husband. I was dressing like a whore or coming home late, meaning I was cheating. I was spending money on things I wanted, meaning I was financially irresponsible. He never said anything positive. He was a sea of absolute negativity. I don't see how anyone could want to say anything good about you, Jennifer, I said softly. I knew I had to leave. He was crazy, and I knew that one day he would either hit me and put me in the hospital or just destroy me. I called my father and sobbed into the phone, begging him to save me. He arrived with two of my uncles and a few of his friends. My ex-husband tried to fight them off, but pushing and hitting a woman is a different thing than fighting off a man. Or a man, since my father knocked his watch off him with one punch and then they tied him to a chair while they helped me move out. I immediately went to the police, got a restraining order and an ERO against him. I've been divorced for 7 years and he doesn't know where I am. I've barely dated Mark. I've been afraid for so long. She raised her eyes and looked into mine. Then I met you, and I had feelings I hadn't felt in so long. I'd never felt them for him. She got behind the wheel, but it wasn't safe to drive, so I offered to drive her home. Stopping in front of an apartment building, I realized I had considered it before choosing my current residence. After escorting her inside, she opened the front door and hesitated. I made my decision, pulled her to me, and kissed her again. I had a wonderful night, Jennifer. I'd like to spend it again. During the week? Any night you want. I'm a pretty good cook in the kitchen if you'd like to have dinner with me. Let me know the evening and I'll bring something too. I'm a pretty good cook myself. She smiled. Okay, I'll cook first, and then you cook for me, and we'll compare results. What night? Wednesday, Mark, although I'm expecting your usual nightly call. And lots of messages. If you play your cards right, you might even get a surprise or two in a message. What are you doing tomorrow? Nothing. Why don't we go to the beach? You just want to see me in a bikini. No, I just want to have a good time. When I got home, I heard my phone buzz a couple times and didn't open it until I was inside and sitting on the couch with a beer in my hand. I had a great night, Mark. I wanted you to spend the night with me, but I don't want to rush things. I don't want to rush things either. When you're here Wednesday night, bring a change of clothes. I want you to stay, but it's too early for anything but sleeping in the same bed, Mark. I'm tired of sleeping alone, Jennifer. I am too. I'm already in bed. It's royal, but it feels empty. I didn't feel that way until I met you. I'll pick you up at 9 o'clock in the morning. I'll take you out for breakfast first, and then we'll go to the beach. What's your favorite color? Usually blue. On a woman, black or red. J. Then I have the perfect bikini for you. I'll see you in the morning, Mark. Sweet dreams, beautiful. The last message was a love heart. Stopping the next morning outside her apartment complex, she honked at me. I knocked on the door and heard her calling me inside. She smiled at me. What do you say? Do you have a broom? I'll have to fight off all the men. Her smile widened and she disappeared, returning in a t-shirt and shorts. Grabbing her bag, I put it in the trunk next to my car and drove her to a beachside cafe to eat a simple but hearty breakfast. By the time we were ready to sunbathe, the beach had already filled up. We spent the entire day on the beach, going down to the water a couple times. Do you want to stay for a drink? I'd love to, but if I stay, I don't want to leave. She walked over to me and said, Go home and change your clothes, she whispered. Come back and have a drink and stay the night. I ran into the house, threw out my things, quickly packed my bag, grabbed the essentials, and rushed to her. When I, out of breath, knocked on the door, she opened it and laughed as I caught my breath. Grabbing me by my shirt, she dragged me inside, slammed the door shut, and pushed me back onto the couch. The next morning, she made me breakfast, and we spent the day just lying around her apartment. Any silence was comforting. Take your time, Jenny, I whispered. We have all the time in the world. I knew I was already in love with her, and I sensed she was feeling the same way. The only problem was that I hoped it wasn't withdrawal. I had just recently left my wife of 20 years and had fallen in love with the first woman I saw. But I wanted to think it was fate that brought us together. We didn't just happen to be at the supermarket that day. We didn't text all the time during the day because she was busy teaching, but we talked every night. The guys at work knew I was now seeing someone, and I let my family in Sydney know I had met someone special. My dad called and gave me updates on Kylie. Apparently, she was on the verge of moving out. She was still trying to find me, but no one would tell her anything. She thought I was still in Sydney and hoped she would eventually meet me. Wednesday evening couldn't come fast enough. Jennifer had prepared a sumptuous dinner, delicious and hearty, and the dessert she made for us made a lasting impression on me. Patting myself on my stomach, I said, "It is often said that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach." "I love you," she whispered. Turning to kiss her, I couldn't help but smile. "I love you too," I whispered back. "Isn't it a little early?" "Not at all, Jenny. If that's how we feel about each other, then that's how it is." I felt it on our first date over a cup of coffee. I knew I'd met the man I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. "And I mean, if you want to be closer to your kids, I'll go with you." "Are you sure? It's a big decision." "There's nothing keeping me here, Mark. My parents are still healthy. My sister is happily married. I won't make a decision right now, but my heart says I should come with you. I'd love to meet your children. They'll be here for Christmas. Then you will all come to spend Christmas with my family." That night, she visited my apartment for the first time. She called it a bit bachelor, but it was clean and neat, though she understood why I kept it simple since it was only a temporary place where I would be living. At the mention of marriage, she blushed and turned away. Gently taking her wrist, I admitted that I was already thinking about it too. "Jenny, I can't remember the last time I felt this much love for Kylie. I'm not saying that because she broke my heart and cheated on me. Maybe it's because we've been on a roll all these years. Maybe it's because it's something new. Maybe it's just because I'm older and have more life experience. But I love the hell out of you, Jennifer Morris. And one day, I want to be Jennifer Williams," she whispered back. For the next few weeks, life was bliss. We never parted for a single night, though truth be told, we spent more nights at her apartment rather than mine, as her apartment was much nicer to be in. She spoke to my father on the phone more than once, and I kept my kids in the loop, but they didn't want to talk until they met her in person. After calling my son the week before Christmas, I asked about his mother and what she was doing. "I told her I wouldn't be here for Christmas. I think she guessed you weren't in Sydney." "Lottie hates her daddy. I mean pure hatred. She's spoken to her once since you left, and since that phone call, she's pretty much stopped talking to her. I talked to your sister last night. She'll be here in a couple days." "What about Grandpa and Naomi?" "I'll talk to them when I get back to Sydney. Jenny will probably come with me. We'll need to get her a job and buy a place as close as possible so she doesn't have to commute." "Are you sure you don't want to stay there, Dad? Lottie and I have been talking, and we're both considering moving there to be closer to you. I know your sister is thinking about it too." Jennifer listened and took my hand, squeezing it. "Are you sure about this, Steve? You're going to leave behind all your friends and family. You're more important, Dad. Trust me, when Lottie gets here in a couple days, she'll be sure to mention it. And her husband will be in favor of it too. He hates living in Sydney." I glanced at Jennifer, unable to hide my surprise. "I'll still need to go back to make sure the divorce goes through. Don't make any hasty decisions, Steve. I know how it sounds, but my decision to leave your mother was planned in advance." "Oh, I'm more than aware of that, Dad. As far as I'm concerned, to hell with her. She's still trying to convince people that she didn't do anything wrong, and that it was your own fault for leaving." Jennifer came with me to the airport the day my daughter arrived. She took her husband Tom with her, but as soon as Charlotte saw me, she dropped her things and ran to me. It was like those days when I used to pick her up from school, and she was so happy to see me. She cried again for a few minutes, and by the time I introduced her to Jennifer, they were both in tears. I looked at Tom and shrugged helplessly. The next day, my son surprised me by knocking on my apartment door. "Daddy," he exclaimed, and we hugged. The bastard hugged me tightly, and we both had to wipe our cheeks as I led him inside to introduce Jennifer. "Well, at least he looks a lot like you," she said. I realized what she meant, but I'd already done the DNA test. Kylie hadn't cheated on me this early in our relationship, but I still needed reassurance. Later that morning, I drove the five of us to Jennifer's parents' house. The trunk was full of gifts, and I dropped them all off. Her mother fell in love with my daughter in 2 minutes, and my son, I'm sure, was accepted by them as one of their own grandchildren, just as they accepted me as their son. I called my father through an online video service so we could exchange Christmas wishes. My brother, his wife, my sister, and her husband and their children celebrated Christmas with him. Kylie had long since left our former home and moved in with her parents. The news that surprised me was that her affair partner had been kicked out of the house by his wife, who used evidence to get him fired for gross misconduct. Apparently, my wife was holding on to her job literally by a thread, but was demoted and also lost several mutual friends who couldn't forgive her for cheating on me. It was a great day. My kids took tons of pictures for their social media accounts. I had long since lost interest in such things, considering them a waste of time, but soon I started getting messages from a few old friends contacting my dad and asking if he knew my number. Many were curious to know what happened, so I answered simply. Others gave me information about Kylie, but I replied that it didn't matter. As soon as the 12 months were up, I would file for divorce and return to Sydney to make sure it went into effect. Christmas with Jennifer and her family was wonderful. When she mentioned that she was coming to Sydney with me, I told her that we would be staying in Adelaide and someone from my family would join us instead. Her face lit up, and I brought her almost to tears when I finally gave her the gift I wanted. It was too early to propose since I was still technically married, so I bought her a gorgeous necklace and bracelet. She immediately put them on and whispered that she would wear them as often as she could. After we ate a big lunch, her father offered me a beer and we ended up in his garage where he put an old sports car on wheels. I haven't seen Jenny this happy in a long time, Mark. Partly I think leaving Adelaide will be good for her. But would you be happy to stay here forever? I'll stay here for her, and my children will move here to be closer. How soon can you finalize the divorce? In a few months at the most. I've been honest with Jenny about everything from the beginning. I understand she's done some nasty things to you. Yes, maybe up to 6 months. Although I only had concrete evidence in the last few weeks before I took out the stiletto. He shook his head. Hell, I've read about all this cheating nonsense. Why get married if you can't keep your legs shut? Ever heard of cuckolds? Judging by the look of disgust on his face, he knew exactly what it was. Yeah, I'm not sure that's what Kylie meant, but it's one of the new bullshit things. Same thing with all these people and wanting a free relationship, so you can cheat while keeping your conscience clear. Honestly, if my wife asked me to do something like that, I'd be in jail. How much disrespect is there in asking someone to do that? Jenny's ex-husband was both cheating and abusive. What? He put a hand on my shoulder. She barely knew about the cheating, but he did it with everyone who moved in. He squeezed my shoulder. She loves you, Mark. Just don't break her heart. Please, I'm not sure I can handle another call like that from my little girl. He sipped from his bottle and, turning away, added quietly, I've almost destroyed her, Mark. I love her more than anything in the world, Daddy. He grinned, already calling me son. I was badly wounded myself, so we both carry the wounds in our hearts and souls. We help each other. We stayed here until late afternoon and my daughter drove us home as I had too much to drink. Back at their apartment, the kids went to bed and Jennifer dragged me to our bedroom. If all was well, she enjoyed New Year's Eve even more. I told the kids to have fun and myself walked her to the hotel downtown. After dinner and drinks, I escorted her back to our room where there was a bottle of champagne and some appetizers. Any wishes for the new year? I inquired. Not just one. Would you like to hear them? Sure. I want you to live here with me. Deal. Yeah. I want you to propose to me as soon as you get your divorce. I'm already looking at rings. She clung to me even tighter. I want a baby, she whispered. Jennifer, we're going to get married and start a family together. My children left a few days later. I was reluctant to let them go, but when I explained that I would probably stay in Adelaide if they wanted to join me, they promised to start exploring their options. I called my father and told him the same thing. He said I had to make the best choice for myself, but he was happy where he was with Naomi, but would of course visit me when he could. The next few months passed in bliss. Eventually, I applied for an apartment lease and moved in with Jennifer. I won't say it was one of those fairy tale romances, after all. It was real life, but I don't remember myself happier. We were a true team in everything about our lives. She knew that the specter of my divorce loomed on the horizon, and at times still loomed in my thoughts. We both still had trust issues, but we agreed to always talk about any problems without giving the other any reason to think we were doing anything wrong. Our lives were wonderful, and we never stopped seeing each other. Just enjoying her presence made me feel better about myself. She made me strive to be a better man, perfect in her eyes. As for Jennifer, she showed me so much love that by the time I was ready to return to Sydney, I had already bought an engagement ring. During the flight, she was more nervous than I was, because she knew that banana skins were still a possibility. My dad met us at the airport, along with my siblings and children. We stayed with my dad while the divorce was being finalized. I had already filed the papers, but the lawyer informed me that Kylie was trying to contest the divorce. Sitting with Jennifer in his office, I was shocked that she was even trying to stop this from happening. I haven't seen her in 12 months, I stated. I followed the letter of the law. I can even prove that I have lived in Adelaide for the last year and she hasn't lived with me the whole time. What's more, we haven't been in touch at all. That's true, but she can still dispute that, he replied. No judge will listen to her arguments, and no counseling will be forced. I assume Jennifer is your partner? Kylie cheated on me. That was the original reason. Now I have a better reason to divorce her. Once we're divorced, I'll propose to Jenny, and we'll get married as soon as possible. We plan to have children after the divorce, Jennifer added. Okay, I'll talk to her lawyer and find out what she wants. There's really not much she can do, but a smart lawyer will be able to fight it. 3 days later, I heard back from my attorney. Kylie would sign her name to the divorce agreement, so the petition would be joint, which meant the case would be heard without delay if I agreed to talk to her one last time. I discussed this with Jennifer, who supported me no matter what I decided to do. My attorney suggested that I just talk to her to work things out. My father agreed. You're with Jennifer now, son, he stated. You're getting married, starting a new family, and your kids will be with you in Adelaide soon. Are you still angry with her? Not really. I've made my peace with it by now. I guess you haven't. It's her own fault, and I understand why I don't want to see her, but let her speak her mind and then just put it all behind you. Okay, I'll talk to my lawyer and he'll straighten it out. The very next week, we found ourselves in court. My lawyer explained that once the meeting was finalized and she signed the papers, the judge would be ready to sign off on our divorce, and I would be a free man 1 month and 1 day after the judge issued the divorce decree. I hadn't seen Kylie since the night she left for her date. She was waiting in the room when Jennifer and I approached my attorney. He explained that Kylie was inside with her lawyer and no one else. Taking Jennifer's hand, I led her and the lawyer into the room. Kylie looked up in shock when she saw that I had entered with another woman. Barely glancing at her, I led Jennifer over to a vacant chair and pulled it out as I always did, making sure she was comfortable, and sat myself in the chair in the middle, my lawyer to my left. Taking Jennifer's left hand in my right, I made our hands rest on the table in full view of everyone. She pulled her chair as close to mine as possible and rested her head on my shoulder. Finally, I looked at Kylie. Honestly, she looked like shit. I'd heard often enough that Kylie's life hadn't been easy since I'd left her. I had no sympathy for her in the slightest. She had made a choice that had cost her everything. She had no contact with her daughter. Our son barely spoke to her at all. My whole family cut off all contact with her. And from what I heard, even her own family was disappointed, but felt they had to accept her since my father had kicked her out of the house. Okay, talk, Kylie, so we can get this divorce over with. I have a life of my own that I want to start, and you're left in the past where you belong. Who is she? She asked quietly. Who? The woman next to you. That's Jennifer Morris. As soon as our divorce is finalized, I'm going to propose to her and one day she'll be Jennifer Williams. And I will naturally say yes to his proposal because I want nothing more than to be his wife and the mother of his future children. I smiled for a moment, though I didn't take my gaze away from Kylie's eyes. As soon as she says yes, we'll organize a simple wedding ceremony. With any luck, by the time we're married, she'll be carrying our child. It pained me to hear all this. I still knew my soon-to-be ex-wife, and the pain in her eyes was real. You recovered very quickly, she stated. I wasn't the one who cheated, Kylie. It was you. I remember leaving the evidence. You never gave me an explanation. I left that night and you never said anything. You didn't fight for me. I didn't have to fight for you because I was your damn husband. So in the end, you weren't worth fighting for. You cheated on me, Kylie. You showed your true colors after 20 years together. I remember our talks about monogamy and fidelity. I warned you that if you turned out to be like my mother, I wouldn't hesitate to leave. All you've done is make my decision easier. Do you even regret what you did? Don't bother answering because I don't. You only regret getting caught. Not that you proved that our marriage was just a sham and you're a worthless whore, just like my own mother. Her lawyer cleared his throat. I stared at him. Back off if you don't like what I'm saying. She wants to talk. Fine. I have the right to speak too. I made a mistake. Treason isn't a mistake. Treason is a series of decisions you made. I don't care if he seduced you or if you went out on purpose. The simple fact is that you slept with him and therefore lost the right to call me your husband. It was just sex. And there it is. The very phrase that so many sluts use to justify their decision. I'm sorry, but most people equate sex with love. And considering you were my wife, I was the one you should have been doing it with, not some damn idiot you were working with. We talked about this before we were married, Kylie. You just don't remember. I warned you again what would happen if you cheated on me. You're forgetting that my mother cheated too. As soon as I pulled my head out of my ass, I knew what you were doing and I just had to gather proof. If you had said no that night, would you still have left? Yes. I would have left either way. But I would have left in a different way. What you did that night was so damn disrespectful, you deserved everything that happened afterward. You took all our money. Consider it payment for 20 wasted years. I paused and shook my head. No, that's not really fair or right. You gave me our 2 children. It wasn't a waste. I also confirmed that they were mine. That upset her. I never cheated on you back then. No, you only turned into a whore after that. You sold our house. No, I gave it to my father. It's still in his name and he's renting it out. He's already told me he's going to sell it and give me most of the money so I can buy another house where I live now. You didn't even give me a chance, Mark. Because you certainly didn't deserve one, Kylie. Where do you live now? None of your business. I don't want you to know that information. The day I left, you stopped mattering to me. Our children are grown and can choose who they want to be with on special days, whether it's birthdays or holidays. She fell silent, realizing that nothing she said would make me change my mind. Just sign the papers and move on with your life, Jennifer stated. He hasn't seen you or spoken to you in 12 months. He's come to terms with it. He loves me and I love him. We're going to get married, start our own family, and grow old together. You decided to leave him. I'm glad I was the one who caught him, hugged him, whispered that everything would be okay and I would never let him down. My heart belongs to him. And I know his heart belongs to me. I didn't mean to. She met my eyes and I saw tears. I kept my composure. Water fireworks wouldn't work on me this time. I still love you, Mark. Good for you. I don't care, Kylie, I replied coldly. His tone almost made her jump. I don't hate you anymore. Don't let the cold tone fool you. I just don't care about you anymore. You stopped being my problem the day you let another man do this. We sat in silence until her lawyer finally cleared his throat. Kylie, this is clearly going nowhere, her lawyer stated. Just sign the papers and end this farce. He had clearly gone further, as he intended to remarry. No judge worth his salt would stand in the way of that. Your marriage is over. Your children are grown. You no longer have any property in common. It's over. Do the decent thing, sign the papers, and move on with your lives. Nim, nim. He took the papers out of the folder and placed them in front of her, then held out a pen to her. Kylie met my gaze, and then she cried. I knew her enough to know she was genuinely upset. Wiping her cheeks, she carefully took the proffered pen with a trembling hand and looked over the papers. At the very bottom, she signed and dated it. Is my presence in the courtroom necessary? I asked my attorney. No, Mark. You are free to go. You will receive the divorce decree in the mail. Good. Then we're done. Rising to her feet, Jennifer took my hand, and I led her out of the room. I'm sorry, Mark, I heard her say. I'll always love you. I appreciated the apology, though it no longer meant anything. It was too little and too late. But as for the last 3 words, I'm pretty sure she still loved me, but I didn't care. The woman I loved now held my hand, and in a month and a few days, she would be my bride. Walking outside, I saw my father, Naomi, Steve, and Charlotte waiting for us at the cafe. After patting me on the head, we walked onwards to the nearest pub as I was really thirsty for a drink. After buying a mug each, we sat down at a table, and I explained what the conversation was about. They cheered up when I admitted that it was probably more me talking, laying out everything I wanted to say. What did she look like? Charlotte inquired. Like shit. Definitely looks her age, if not older. Definitely deserved the promotion, Jennifer whispered in my ear. Did she sign the papers? My father asked. Nodding, we clinked glasses and sipped our beers. I went through the same shit with your mother. I'm sure everything Kylie told you. She tried to tell me too. She wasn't trying to blame me, Dad. Mom was accusing you of working too hard. She was trying to justify it? Stephen asked. Yeah, the old line. It was just sex. What is it with these promiscuous women who claim it was just sex? Charlotte wondered, almost to herself. I married my husband and wouldn't dream of leaving him just for that. If that's what I want, I turn to my husband and achieve it. She stopped and blushed, realizing that she had just said this in the presence of her father and grandfather. We exchanged glances and burst into laughter. Well said, girl, well said, exclaimed my father. And those are words to live with. Your grandfather doesn't stand a chance, Naomi declared. And if he needs a little chemical help, he knows there are other things he can use. Naomi, that's my grandfather, Charlotte exclaimed. He's not dead, and neither am I. I'm 65 years old and still more than capable, objected Naomi. Your grandfather met me at the right age. But once we were together, we made a promise to be good for each other. We both had failed marriages due to infidelity. I'm just glad it's almost over, I admitted. I don't like being another divorcee. But as I said in the room, infidelity is unforgivable. To be fair, you have to give credit to those who chose to keep the relationship alive. Perhaps if you kids were 10 years younger, I would have felt trapped. But then, I looked at my dad. It was a struggle, but he always supported me. We stayed in Sydney for a few more days while I discussed with my family their plans. Charlotte and Tom immediately agreed to come to Adelaide. Stephen was still assessing his options but would likely join us. To my surprise, my sister offered to join us. Inviting her to dinner when she arrived alone, I learned that her marriage had also broken up. You can stay with us while you sort things out, Jennifer offered. Any family would welcome you. You're my family now, and my family is yours too. I'm selling the house here, and we're going to capitalize on that, I added. Housing prices in Adelaide are much more reasonable than here, so we're going to buy a big house. With rooms to fill with little people, Jennifer suggested, taking my hand and placing it on her stomach. I'll be carrying our first child soon. How many do you want, Mark? As many as you want, Jenny. I love being a father. A month later, I received a divorce certificate stating that my marriage to Kylie Daniels, since she hadn't kept her last name, was officially over. I never heard from her again, but rumor had it that she had left Sydney within 6 months of our divorce. According to Stephen, who was the only one still in touch with her, she had gone north to Queensland to make a fresh start. After that, I just stopped asking. and Stephen stopped telling me, as I was no longer interested in what she was doing. 2 days after receiving the divorce decree, I proposed to Jennifer on the beach in front of our families. She could barely get a word in edgewise, nodding as I slipped the engagement ring on her finger. 6 months later, we were married on the same beach, as our new home was only a few hundred meters away. As she walked towards me in her wedding dress, no one could fail to notice her baby, but my future wife just glowed as her father led her towards me. Taking her hand, we couldn't contain our smiles as we turned to face the celebrant. My dears, we are gathered here today. Epilogue. I'm a year away from retirement, and life couldn't be better. Jennifer and I have been married for almost 20 years, and we are still as happy today as the day we met, our first date, our first lovemaking. All those first meetings leading up to our wedding day. 6 months after returning to Adelaide after that trip to Sydney, my daughter and son were living in Adelaide. My daughter is still married to Tom and has 3 grandchildren. My son is married to a wonderful man, and they have adopted 2 children. My father and Naomi moved in with us in Adelaide a year after the divorce, where he lived for almost 10 years before passing away peacefully in his sleep. Naomi was heartbroken, and the first thing we did was insist that she live with us. She resisted for a while until she realized that our house was huge, and we ended up building a granny apartment for her so she could maintain her independence. My sister moved in with us in Adelaide almost immediately after my husband left, taking the children with her. Like her brother, she was a victim of infidelity, and he didn't fight back when she took his children. We found her a place to live when she stayed with us for a couple months. She ended up marrying one of my co-workers and good friends, and they have been happily married for 15 years now. My brother stayed in Sydney and was the only one who kept in touch with our mother. At the age of 60, I learned that she had passed away. Having had no relationship with her for almost 40 years, I was unable to feel any sadness upon learning of her death. Jennifer offered to attend her funeral after all. Again, it was about getting better, so we all flew to Sydney to attend the funeral. I was surprised to learn that she had remarried and practically adopted her husband's children as her own. They weren't shocked to learn of our existence, but were surprised that she didn't admit that she was completely estranged from 2 of her 3 children. We could have explained why we were estranged, but funerals are not the time. We simply said we had come to pay our last respects before returning home. As there were no relatives left in Sydney, my brother moved in with us in Adelaide a year later. As for Jennifer and I, we ended up having 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. My older daughter and son were thrilled to have siblings and enjoyed babysitting, although Jennifer and I didn't get out much. But we still loved each other deeply, always cherished each other's companionship, never went to bed irritated, and our lives are as vibrant today as they were when we first slept together. I look back on my life in the period when I was divorced. I'm sure there are those who would have preferred that I give in to my ex-wife, but what would have been the point? The fact that I left without saying a word actually hurt her much more, and I remained silent for a year until I went back to make sure the divorce went through. She knew my thoughts on fidelity and broke the contract. As for those who believe in reconciliation, I can't agree with that either. If your wife cheats and you find the strength to forgive her, that's your business. But trust is broken, and can it ever be fully restored? I don't believe it can. You will spend the rest of your life in suspicion and resentment, and in the end, divorce is probably inevitable. Instead, I went down a road that is often not traveled. There was no real revenge, at least not to the point of burning everything to the ground, but there was no chance of reconciliation either. I just walked away and decided to move on without Kylie. I found Jennifer, my one true soulmate. I still believe that meeting in the supermarket was fate. I'm not religious, but I'm sure there are old-world religions that talk about gods of fate. Are you ready, Mark? I turned around and saw my wife looking simply gorgeous in a gorgeous red ball gown. I see you still have the old magic. Any news on the children? They're either on their way or getting ready to leave. And the little ones? They'll do just fine without us for one evening, unless they burn the place to the ground. Then we have time to fool around? Of course. I love you, husband. I love you, wife. Many more years of happiness? I hope so. I'll tell the children we won't be here long. They'll know why. And thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe to my channel and watch for the next video.